Our next reading is Working Capital Management, a quick overview, and these are specific learning outcome statements in this reading. The first reading says, describe primary and secondary sources of liquidity and factors that influence a company's liquidity position. Primarily, there are two sources of liquidity. First is called the primary source of liquidity. These are the sources of cash it uses in its normal day-to-day operations, like by selling goods and services for cash, by selling goods and services on credit, and then collecting money from your receivables, getting cash by selling investment securities, getting a trade credit. Trade credit is also a source of finance. Getting a trade credit, goods or services on credit for 2 months or 3 months, it's a source of finance, a primary source of finance, a primary source of liquidity, as well as the lines of credit from the bank. And if a firm manages its cash effectively, delaying your payment to your suppliers as far as practical without damaging your relationship with your vendors, and collecting your receivables as quickly as possible. So managing your cash flow this way will increase the liquidity for the firm. So this is the primary source of liquidity. These are the primary sources. Then secondary sources of liquidity. They include liquidation or liquidating short-term and long-term assets, negotiating debt agreements. Maybe the loans are becoming due and we do not have the sufficient liquidity to pay off, so we renegotiate, reschedule our loan. And in desperate conditions, when we think that we cannot go on, we may have to file for bankruptcy or file for reorganization. So these are specifically discussed in chapter 7 and chapter 11, reorganization and bankruptcy. These are the laws. These are not the chapters in any book. These are the laws under the US regulations. Chapter 7, chapter 11, bankruptcy and reorganization. So under these laws, a business might file a suit in the court of law for bankruptcy or reorganization. So this indicates that the business might be in trouble. So primary sources of liquidity shows business strength, whereas resorting to secondary sources of liquidity, it's an indication that business is in trouble. The business condition is deteriorating. Factors that influence company's liquidity position. If a company can collect cash quickly, maybe in 10 days, and delay the payments 30 days, see, you have 20 days worth of surplus liquidity. So collect as quickly as possible and delay the payment as late as possible without damaging your relationship with your vendors and service providers. That is very essential. So this way, a firm will not have liquidity problem, collecting as early as possible and making the payment as late as possible. If this strategy of managing liquidity is not adopted, the business will have liquidity problems, which you call the drags on liquidity and pulls on liquidity. Drags on liquidity is that for some reason we are late in collection of cash from our customers. There is a delay in collection from our customers. When you get cash from your customers and the time is longer, this will cause liquidity problem. But at the same time, we are paying, for whatever reason, we are paying our vendors quickly. The vendor payment turnover is higher. So we are delaying the collection and making the payment sooner. This will result in liquidity crisis. This will result in liquidity crunch for the business. Business will not be able to meet its short-term obligations out of the liquid resources available. So you can say it is ineffective cash flow management. Delaying collections for whatever reason and making more frequent payments to your suppliers, bad. Effective cash flow management is collecting as quickly as possible and delaying the payment to your vendors as far as practical without damaging the relationships with your vendors. So that completes your LOS 1. Next, compare a company's liquidity measures with those of peer companies. What is liquidity? We discussed in our reading related to financial statement analysis. Liquidity refers to the ability to pay short-term obligations as they come due. This is the most frequently used ratio, current ratio, that is current assets upon current liabilities. Let's say if your current assets are $200,000 and your current liabilities are $100,000, so it indicates for every $1 liability you have $2 worth of current assets, so it's showing a little margin of safety. Now we know that inventory and prepayments, they are included in your current assets. So if we exclude these two, inventory and prepayments, and take cash, marketable securities and net receivables upon current liability, this is called quick ratio. So taking the same numbers, if we deduct inventory and prepayments, we are left with the quick assets, that's 120, upon current liabilities $100,000. So that's 1.2 ratio 1. So for every $1 liability, we have $1.2 worth of quick assets, meaning thereby we still have sufficient liquidity to pay off our current obligation as they become due. But again, sometimes it's difficult to collect money from receivables quickly. So removing receivables as well from the picture will give you a very conservative ratio called cash ratios. Cash plus marketable securities upon current liabilities. So removing account receivable, let's say these are all assumed numbers. So deducting receivables from this leaves us only with $70,000 worth of cash and marketable securities divided by current liabilities. Now this reveals the real trouble. 0.7 to 1. For every $1 liability, we have $0.7 worth of cash and marketable securities. Now this reveals that we will be in trouble. We might not be able to meet all the obligations when they become due. So this is how we measure liquidity. And we can compare our numbers with those of the competitors. And then we can compare it with the industry average. That will give us an idea to some extent how well we are managing our liquidity with regard to our competitors as well as the industry averages. Activity measures. They give indication of how well a firm utilizes various assets such as inventory and fixed assets. We are specifically interested with inventory. Receivables turnover. How many times do your account receivable pay you in 1 year? It can be calculated by dividing annual credit sales ideally. But if credit sale is not available, you can take the number given in the financial statements. Annual sales upon average receivables. This will give you a number, let's say 15 times. The result is 15 times. Numerator divided by denominator. This tells us that our receivables on average pays us 15 times in 1 year. Whether it's good or bad, you need to compare it with the competitors or the industry average. Days of sales outstanding. Sometimes this number could be confusing. 15 times. I would like to know after how many days does my average receivable pay me. So for this, I will simply divide 365 with 15. This gives me 24.3 days. It means my receivables pay me 15 times in 1 year, or in other words, they pay me after 24.3 days. My average receivable, average customer, pays me after 24 days. So this is a measure of liquidity. If this number is shorter, 10 days or 15 days, this means my customers are paying me more frequently after 10 or 15 days. This number would be larger then. So receivable turnover should be higher, more frequently they pay you, and the days sales outstanding, conversely speaking, would be lower. You will receive your payment 10 or 15 days, that's good. Your liquidity will be in good shape if your customers pay you more frequently or they pay you in less number of days. Then inventory turnover. How many times do you sell your inventory, or how many times your inventory is replenished in 1 year? It is CGS upon average inventory. Let's say the result is 20 times. It means your inventory turns 20 times in 1 year. And if we want to convert it into number of days, we'll do the same thing. 365 upon 20, and 365 upon 20 gives you 18.25. It means my inventory is sold within 18.25 days on average. So indicating that it's quite a frequent rotation of your inventory. So as frequently you can sell your goods, as quickly you can get your money from your receivables, your liquidity will be in good shape. Now looking from the other side, payables turnover. How many times do you pay to your average payable? Let's say this number is 13. It means you pay 13 times. In 1 year, you pay your accounts payable 13 times in 1 year. Let's say if we want to calculate it in number of days, so you will divide 365 with 13. That's about 28 days. So it means we pay after 28 days, whereas we collect within 15 days. So it means our collection is faster, our payment is slower. This will give you much needed liquidity. Collect as quickly as possible and delay the payment as far as practical without damaging the relationship with your vendors. Your next reading is evaluate working capital effectiveness of a company based on its operating and cash conversion cycles and compare the company's effectiveness with that of its competitors. This is cash conversion cycle. Day sales outstanding. My day sales outstanding means my average collection period is, let's say, 25 days. My average account receivable takes 25 days to pay me. Days inventory on hand. How many days do I hold my inventory before it is sold? Let's say it's 30. If you add these two, this is called the operating cycle. Remember, day sales outstanding or average collection period and days of inventory on hand, sometimes called the inventory turnover days. If you add these two, what you get is called the operating cycle, right? You take 15 days to pay to your accounts payable. 25 plus 30, 55. If you deduct average payment period, the difference between these two, or the net of all this result, will give you the total duration of your cash conversion cycle. This is the time it takes to convert goods you bought on credit, holding them for some time with you, and then selling it off to your account receivables, getting the money back from your account receivable, and paying the money to the accounts payable from whom you got the goods or services on credit. So this period, 40 days, is called the cash conversion cycle, and this 55 is called the operating cycle. Sometimes cash conversion cycle is called the net operating cycle. Mind the word, cash conversion cycle sometimes is called the net operating cycle, that adjusts for average payment periods as well. And this is how it looks like. Cash conversion cycle is where you buy goods, you convert them into finished goods, hold them for some time, sell it to your account receivables, collect the money and pay to your accounts payable. It's cash conversion cycle. So your reading 4 says, describe how different types of cash flows affect a company's net daily cash position. What's a daily cash position? Daily cash position refers to uninvested cash balances a firm has available to make routine purchases and pay expenses as they come due. It's a very important piece of information. You might be working in a larger organization or a smaller organization, whatever the size of the organization might be. This is something that every firm keeps an eye on. Even you yourself do. You keep on managing your cash on a daily basis. You see how much you have and how much you have to spend on a daily basis. So cash position is something that is very crucial for any organization. Your daily cash collections and payments, the daily cash surplus or deficit needs to be known. There is a regular activity by accounting department where they prepare daily cash position by banks, and this is submitted to the senior management for review on daily basis. This is an extremely important activity. The purpose of managing a firm's daily cash position is to have sufficient cash on hand and make the payments whenever they are needed, and avoid keeping excess cash balance because of the interest income foregone by not investing. We just want to maintain an optimum cash balance so that we do not have to liquidate our investments to pay off our accounts payable, or we should not have too much balance in our current accounts, checking accounts, that we might lose some interest income which we could have earned by investing that cash in some suitable investments. So this is something very important to avoid the shortage and the surpluses at the same time. Shortage will result in requiring cash infusions from banks, credit lines of credit, etc. and surpluses means you will forego interest which you could have earned by putting it in some suitable investments. So these are some typical inflows for a business. We receive cash by selling goods on cash. When we sell goods on services on credit, after some time we start receiving money from our customers, inflow. Cash from subsidiaries, dividend received from investments, interest received from bonds and loans made, tax refunds from IRS, it's an inflow, or borrowings, they are all inflows. Outflows, payment to your employees, of course, for salaries, wages, payment to your vendors for goods and services bought on credit, cash transfers to subsidiaries like inflows versus outflows, interest paid on loan, principal repayments, investment in securities, it's an outflow. When you buy some security, it's an outflow. Taxes paid to IRS is outflow. Dividend paid to your account, to your shareholders, financing outflow. So these are typical inflows and outflows. Your next LOS is calculate and interpret comparable yields on various securities, compare portfolio returns against a standard benchmark, and evaluate company's short-term investment policy guideline. First of all, where does the company invest its surplus cash, short-term surplus cash? Short-term securities in which a firm can invest surplus cash include US Treasury bills. They are issued at discount. Let's say I purchased a bill at 97. On maturity, I'll get $100. So this $3 difference between the price I paid and the price I received, this $3 represents my income. So we can invest in short-term federal agency securities, banker's certificate of deposits, banker acceptance. All these are short-term securities where we can invest our surplus cash to generate some returns. Time deposits, repurchase agreements, commercial papers, money market mutual funds, they will all be discussed in our later slides. No need to discuss them here. We will discuss where they need to be discussed. And then adjustable rate preferred stock. What's the difference between this and our normal preferred stock? Dividends rate normally are fixed for preferred stock, but adjustable rate preferred stocks means the rate is reset quarterly to the current market yields. Not only that, the corporate holders, like some company X Incorporated, and this company has bought certain preferred stock. Such organization that's called corporate holders, companies that have invested in preferred stock versus an individual. So the companies that have invested in such preferred stock, some of the earnings received in the form of dividends is exempt from federal tax. This is an advantage as well. Next, yield calculations for short-term discount securities. First, the percentage discount from face value. For example, I acquire a T-bill by paying $97. So what is the percentage discount? 100 minus 97 upon 100, that's 3%. Next is the discount basis yield, or called the bank discount yield, or BDY. What basically the discount basis yield is? The discount yield is a way of calculating a bond return when it is sold at a discount to its face value. For example, a bond with a face value of $100 sold at $95. Plug it in the formula. Face value of the bond is 100. Price I'm paying is 95. Face value is 100 multiplied by 360 divided by, let's say, 180 days. So calculation of this will give you the discount basis yield. This is commonly used to calculate the yield on municipal notes, commercial paper, and treasury bills. So this factor gives you 5%. Discount times 360 by days 180, this element gives you a final 10% discount basis yield. Next, Money market yield. Money market yield can be calculated using this formula: face value minus purchase price upon price. This part only is also called the holding period yield, multiplied with 360 upon the number of days. So remember, money market yield basically is the rate of return on highly liquid investments with maturity of less than 1 year. It is calculated by multiplying this holding period yield with 360 by the number of days. And this is the final version of the formula: holding period yield time 360 upon number of days. Next is the bond equivalent yield. Bond equivalent yield measure for short-term discount securities is calculated using this formula: face value minus price upon price into 365 by days to maturity. Where will we use this? We'll use bond equivalent yields in order to compare those investments with different payout frequencies. So this is a good formula, but please, you must not confuse the bond equivalent yield with the bond coupon rate. They are two entirely different things. And as we discussed, face value minus price upon price is the holding period yield. So that completes your reading 35E. No, we still have cash management and investment policy. This is the part still remaining from your LOS 35E. Cash management, investment policy. We will have surplus cash. Firms normally have surplus cash. Holding on to surplus cash involves opportunity cost, because that cash could have been invested in a bank or some financial institution or some marketable security to generate some returns. We do not want to hold more cash, surplus cash, but at the same time we do not want to run into a risk of cash shortage where we might not be able to make payments to our suppliers. So we need to make sure that the investments of surplus cash is made most appropriately, so we can have liquid investment whenever we want. We can liquidate those investments, and we can use that cash proceeds to meet our day-to-day operations expenses. So basically our objective is to earn a market return without taking on much risk, liquidity risk or default risk. Liquidity risk means that we may have to sell those investments at a deep discount in order to raise liquidity. The investment might be liquid, so we don't want to incur in liquidity risk, nor do we want to take on any default risk where we have made the investments but the money is lost. So we want to avoid these two risks. So in order to meet our objective, we will select those suitable investments with high credit quality, means little default risk, and relatively short maturities so as to ensure liquidity. So high credit quality will protect against default risk, and short maturities will ensure the liquidity. So large scale organizations, MNCs, they may have surplus cash. So that surplus cash needs to be invested. And for that, there has to be a suitable investment policy. We'll list down certain specific areas of responsibilities and important characteristics of investments to be considered. It is advisable to have a written investment policy statement. An investment policy statement typically should include what? A statement of purpose and objectives of the investment portfolio. What would be the purpose of our investment? What investments would achieve? Some general guidelines about the strategy to be employed. The types of securities that will be used for investment purposes. Who is allowed to purchase securities? Treasurer, Chief Investment Officer. Who is responsible for complying with the company guidelines? Someone responsible should ensure that the policies are being complied with by the Treasurer, by the Chief Investment Officer. What steps will be taken if the investment guidelines are not followed? Types of securities permitted for investment of short-term fund. What type of securities we will use for investment purposes? What are the limitations on the credit ratings of portfolio securities? Which graded investments we will invest in, and which specific rated investments we won't invest in. That must be specified. Limitations on the proportions of the total short-term securities portfolio that can be invested in various types of permitted securities. A, B, C. We can invest maximum of 50% investment in A, 20% in B, 5% C, and so on. So limitation on the proportions of the total short-term securities portfolio that can be invested in the various types of permitted securities. And further, there must be evaluation of our investment policy. An investment policy statement should be evaluated on how well the policy can be expected to satisfy the goals and the purpose of short-term investments, and how well does it help generating returns without taking on excessive credit or liquidity risk. So we have drafted a policy, we have implemented, we have set up the compliance mechanism as well, but how well this policy is functioning, it has to be evaluated. To what extent does it satisfy our goals and purpose of the short-term investment? How well does it help generating returns without taking on excessive credit or liquidity risks? The policy should not be overly restrictive in the context of meeting the goals of safety and liquidity. The treasurer, the chief investment officer, should have been given the leverage to make decision on his own within the set guidelines. He must be given some leverage, some leeway, so that he can decide upon his own understandings rather than just being tied up to a rope and making decision about the investments. Next is evaluate company's management of accounts receivables, inventory, accounts payable over time, and compare to the peers companies. Discuss accounts receivables ratios, this collection period, the accounts receivable turnover. Inventory management. Inventory management involves trade-off. Just like in cash, you shouldn't have excessive cash in the checking accounts, nor should we find ourselves in a position where we are short of cash. Just like same in inventory, neither too high nor too low. If it is too high, these are the costs that you will bear. Storage cost, you have to get your inventory insured. There is a risk of theft. If there is lots of inventory, there is always a risk of theft by the employees. It's called pilferage. With the passage of time, the quality of your inventory deteriorates, and at the same time, the money that you have invested could have been invested elsewhere to earn some interest. So opportunity cost of funds is involved. These are the cost of carrying excessive inventory. But there is a downside risk as well if we do not hold sufficient inventories. It might result in lost sales, lost contributions. So inventory levels should neither be too high nor too low. If you are too high, you are going to incur these costs. If they are too low, you will miss sales. Reducing inventory will free up cash that can be invested surely. Running down your inventory will convert inventory into cash, so liquidity will be improved. A large inventory can lead to greater losses from obsolete items. As I said, with the passage of time, the inventory items become obsolete. So they may have to be written down, and that's a direct charge against your income statement, resulting in lower profitability. Accounts payable management. Payable must be managed well because they are our source of our working capital, as discussed earlier. Now, if you pay early, you could have used that cash to earn some interest. So paying early means interest on cash paid is sacrificed. But if you pay late, that can damage your relationship with your supplier, and we don't want that. So we have to just tread a very slippery road where we don't want to pay early, don't want to delay, somewhere that we can keep our vendors happy, and at the same time we keep our liquidity intact. Late payments can also result in interest charges. Your vendor may charge interest, and your vendor may offer you discount like these, that if you pay within 10 days, 2% would be given off, else you have to pay in 60 days. If you decide to pay on 60th day and you give up this 2% discount, the cost of trade discount, the cost of not taking discount could be very high, could be as high as 50%. In some questions you might see. So it's 1 plus discount percentage upon 1 minus discount percentage, 365 minus past discount. That is simply the payment period, 60 minus discount period. So you will have 50 here, days past discount, or in other words, you can calculate by deducting the discount period from the total payment period, 60 minus 10, 50. So this percentage will be the cost of not taking discount, effective cost of, as if you are taken a loan from the bank. Like if I don't take discount, like in this case, if it's 2, let me calculate this. So 1 plus 2% upon 98% raised to the power 365 upon 50. It gives you 1.1589 minus 1, 15.89. So cost of not taking discount and paying on 60th day is like taking a loan at 15.89%. You can calculate this, plug in this 2 here. 1 minus 2, 98, 365 upon 60 minus 10, that is 40. Simplify this part, deduct 1 from it and convert it into percentage, you get your result 15.89%. So this would be the cost of not taking discount. Payable turnover discussed previously, number of days payable, this is discussed previously as well. So your last LOS is evaluate the choices of short-term funding available to a company and recommend a financing method. Of course, we'll recommend the one that is easily available, not too restrictive and costs less. There are several sources of short-term funding available to a company from both bank and non-bank sources. First is the sources of short-term funding from banks. Lines of credit. Lines of credit can be of different types. Could be uncommitted, committed, or revolving. If the line of credit is uncommitted, it means the banker will offer you the line of credit, but if your circumstances change, if your liquidity and solvency is in danger, then the banker may refuse to extend such line of credit. So uncommitted line of credit means it can be refused, it may be refused by the banker. Then within this, the second categorization, first one is the uncommitted line of credit. Second, given right below this, is committed line or regular line of credit. As the name suggests, the bank will extend you a line of credit that is committed to up to a certain time period. Compared to the uncommitted one, this is more dependable. Since the banker has provided you the credit, committed credit, banker will charge a certain part other than the interest, which you call the commitment fee. Let's say the interest charge is 7% and the banker also charges 0.5% of the line, 1.5% as a commitment fee. So the effective cost of such committed line of credit could be higher. Next, we have the revolving line of credit. Revolving line of credit, again, is similar to the committed line of credit, but it's for a longer period. It can be rolled over from one period to another. Then we have bankers' acceptances. These are specifically used in international trade where you have a document under the LC, maybe a draft or a bill of exchange or maybe a promissory note. So this document can be discounted from a banker at a certain rate. So banker acceptances involves international trade, discounting of certain documents under the letter of credit. It's quite a complex area, so just remember it's a source of finance because you need money, you don't have it, but you have these drafts or bill of exchange or promissory notes, you get it discounted with the banker and you collect the money. But the difference, let's say bill of exchange is for $10 million. When you get it discounted from the bank, after the banker's acceptance, you can get it discounted and might get $9.9 million cash. So first step is acceptance. Once this bill of exchange, promissory note or draft under the LC is accepted by the bank, then that accepted bill of exchange, promissory note or draft can be discounted from any financial institution. So 10 million bill of exchange that is accepted will get you 9.9 million. So the difference between 10 million and 9.9 million is your charges for getting the liquidity. Then we have factoring. You need cash, you do not have cash, your bank lines of credit are exceeding the limits. What to do? You can factor your receivables. Let's say you have $100,000 worth of receivables from whom you get money after 90 days, for example. You need money urgently. So you can get these account receivables factored from a factoring company and the factoring company can advance you maybe up to 90% of this amount. After deducting certain advance interest, maybe they'll pay you $87,000, right? So factoring is a way of raising finance where we can use account receivable as a source of finance through factoring. Then we have non-bank sources of short-term funding. Smaller organizations, they will go for trade credit. Trade credit is a source of finance. For smaller organization, trade credit is a source of finance. It's a non-banking source of finance. Buying goods or services on credit effectively is a source of finance. But larger organization, trade credit is not sufficient for them. So large credit-worthy companies can issue short-term debt securities called the commercial paper. They are in the denomination of $100,000 and their maturity is up to 270 days. So this is what they can use as a source of finance, and this ends your LOS working capital management.